And so I was born August of 1967 in Detroit. In July 1967 is when the riots began in Detroit. I'm the product of an affair between my white mother, Helen, and a black co-worker, my father, Lawrence, nicknamed Pee-wee. They were co-workers at the Chevy stamping plant in Livonia, Michigan. Pseudo-happily married, just to different people. So I was immediately, once she gave birth, I was immediately put up for adoption. And so 3 months later, I'm adopted by this white minister, and they had 3 biological children. So I'm the youngest of the 4. When I was 11 months old, we woke up to this, a burning cross in our front yard. That was the community's response to having a child of color in a community that didn't want any color. So after 3 years, my parents came to the conclusion that this community is going to change us before we change it. And it's time for us to leave. So my dad accepted a call at a church in Detroit where the church was half white, half black, but the parsonage or the home that was owned by the church that we lived in was in a black neighborhood. So from age 3, I was 3 at the time, to 18, we lived in Detroit, and I was always surrounded by kids that looked like me, and that was life-changing. Those kids were like superheroes to me. They showed me a black that I wasn't seeing on TV.
What did your grandma say when you interviewed her?
So I'm interviewing her about for the book, and I'm asking her, so the initial question I asked her when I first got there was, so what'd you think about adopting this biracial child? About my mom adopting this biracial child? And she was like, oh, I thought it was nice. But then I started asking her more specific questions. And so I asked her about the cross burning, right? So when that happened, my grandmother and grandfather were in Florida, and they get the news of this cross being burned on her daughter's lawn. And this was in 1968, shortly after Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King had been killed. So the real fear that someone could have died behind this was very, very real. And so one of the only times I think, so my grandmother and grandfather came up from Florida shortly after that because they were just concerned about their daughter who was raising 4 children all under the age of 5. And the safety with this family and what was going to happen. So I asked her about this cross-burning incident. There was, at that time when they were visiting, the head pastor refused to baptize me. There was this big hullabaloo in the church about that. I eventually got baptized, but the head pastor refused to do it. It was by an associate pastor. The church was really split between, we're for this black kid against this black kid. And my grandmother's all in this, and I'm remembering bringing all these memories back up to her. And so then I asked her the question again, and she's emotionally now back into the late 60s. I said, so what'd you think about my mom adopting this little child of color? And she said, I was heartbroken. Wow. Yeah, that's one of those real, for the book, I'm like, man, that's gold. But then personally, you're like, wow, that's horrible. Like, my presence broke your heart. Yeah, so it was things like that she would share with me. And I think my grandmother just really struggled with the whole race thing. And I think she compartmentalized it to the point where she had come to a place where she accepted I wasn't really black. And that's how she dealt with it. And I was just talking to a friend of mine in high school, and he met my grandmother and grandfather. And I told him, I said, man, I really wish I would have known enough to watch my grandmother around you guys, like my black friends when they came around. Because I would love to just be a fly on the wall, to look at her and see her reaction. And my friend said, yeah, man, your grandfather was cool. Yeah, I was not comfortable around your grandmother. So she did. Just think of me as, he's not really black. And I was an exception to the rule in her mind. So yeah, she really struggled with that growing up. And that's a point that we've got to get across to transracial families is it doesn't only affect you, it affects your community. So how do we do a better job with that?